The night they brought my horse in ruined, I heard the grooms whispering the name the county had given me, the Beast of Blackmere, and I did not correct them, because a beast was the only thing left in me worth being afraid of. I stood in the dark of the tack passage where the rushlight could not reach, and I watched them lay the great gray stallion down on the straw. Sparabo had carried me through cannon fire once and never balked, and now his off hind leg was laid open to the bone, where a fallen beam in the burning east range had struck him as I dragged him clear of it. He screamed and thrashed and struck the wall with his hooves, and the two grooms, the last two of all my household who had not yet run from me, pressed themselves flat to the far stalls and would not go to his head. "He'll die of it," said the elder, whose name was Tom Sowerby and whose father had shod horses for my father before me. "Or he'll kill whoever tries. Better his lordship shoot him and be done." His lordship, that was me. The words had a way of curdling in a man's mouth when he said them of me now, as though he had bitten into something spoiled and was too well bred to spit. I came out of the dark because a man ought at least to be the one to end what he has broken. Both grooms flinched from me the way men flinch from a thing that ought not to walk upright. I was long used to the flinching. I had a face for it. The fire that took the east range of Blackmere 2 winters gone, the same fire that killed my brother Edmund, who ran into it for a reason I will tell you before I am done, had left the right side of that face a ruin of scar from the brow to the jaw, had drawn the fingers of my right hand into a claw that would not fully open, and had spoiled my leg so that I walked with the long dragging stride of a wounded animal. I wore my collar high and my hat low, and I kept from the sight of men, and the county, which loves nothing on this earth so well as a story it can tell by its own hearth, had settled it among themselves that the Duke of Blackmere had gone as savage as his scars, that he shot at trespassers, that he let his great hall rot to ruin around him, that he had a temper no Christian soul should venture near. Only the last of those was near the truth, and I had come by it honestly. "Fetch me the pistol from the harness room," I said, and my own voice frightened them, low and cracked from long disuse, for I spoke to almost no one now. "Then get out of my yard, the both of you, and don't trouble to come back at Lady Day." Young Ackroyd went white and bolted for the gun. Tom Sowerby looked at Sparabo thrashing and bleeding in the straw, and then he looked at me a long moment, and I saw him make up his mind that this was the last night he would take my wages. I did not blame him. A man should not have to serve a beast, nor watch one shoot the finest horse in 3 ridings for want of anyone with the courage to save it. And then a voice came out of the black yard behind them, a woman's voice, plain and unhurried, with the flat, honest music of the North Dales worn into it. "Don't shoot him, he can be saved." I turned. There was a girl standing in the arch of the yard gate with a horn lantern in her hand and a bundle slung over her shoulder, mudded to the knees of her skirts, having plainly walked a great distance in the dark. She was no one I knew. She was perhaps 22, small and square-shouldered, with a broad, weather-browned face that no soul on earth would ever have called a beauty, and a great deal of dark hair coming loose from beneath a plain linen cap. And she looked at the screaming, bleeding, half-mad horse the way another woman might look at a kettle boiling over, as a thing to be dealt with, and not for one instant a thing to be feared. "Who let you through the gate?" I said. She did not trouble to answer that. She set her lantern down upon the mounting block, and her bundle beside it, and she made to walk past both grooms and past me toward the stallion, and I put out my ruined hand and caught her by the arm. "He'll break your skull," I said. She looked down at my hand where it held her. She looked at the claw of it, at the scarred knuckles, at the fingers that would not straighten. I had not laid a hand upon another living person in 2 years, and I had forgotten what it was to have my hand looked at so near. I braced for the flinch. Everyone flinched. It was as certain as the turning of the seasons. She did not flinch. She looked at my hand the way she had looked at the horse, as a thing, plainly, that had once been badly hurt. "Then you'd best let go of my arm, sir," she said. so I've both hands to keep my skull with. And such was the plainness of it, the sheer unfrightened sense of it, that I let go. She went to Sparabo. She did not rush at him. She stopped an arm's length off and stood very still and made a low sound in her throat, a sound with no words in it at all, and she did not look him in the eye but at the ground before his forefeet, and she waited. He screamed and struck and rolled his eye white at her. She waited. And I stood there with the pistol come warm into my hand from young Ackroyd, and I found I could not lift it, because I had never in all my life seen anything to match the patience of that small, muddy girl standing in my ruined yard at midnight. It took her the better part of an hour, and she did not once hurry, and she did not once give back a step. By the end of it she was sitting in the bloodied straw with the great gray head laid in her lap, and his breathing had gone long and slow, and his rolling eye had gone soft, and he suffered her to look at the ruin of his leg. She looked at it a long while. "It's clean to the bone, but the bone's whole," she said, not to me, to no one, thinking aloud, her blunt fingers moving over the wound. "It wants cleaning and stitching and packing, and 6 weeks of stillness after, and someone he trusts to keep the fever off him, for the fever's what'll kill him, not the cut." Then she did look up at me, across the lantern light, and she said, "Have you anyone can do all that, sir?" "No," I said. "Then you've me," she said, "if you'll take me. I'm a fair hand with a sick beast. It's the one thing I'm good for. I came up the fell for the kennel place your steward posted at Harden Market. I didn't know it was for a duke." "There is no steward," I said. "He is gone. They all go in the end." She took that in without any surprise, sitting there in the blood and the straw with my dying horse gone quiet under her hands, and she nodded slowly, as though a great many small things had just been made plain to her at once. She said, "I did wonder why a fine place like this is going to ruin under all the neglect. Well," she stroked the gray nose absently, the way you gentle a fretful child, "the horse wants saving whether there's a steward or none. And your kennels, I passed them coming up the drive. There's a hound in there with a wound gone foul. I heard him crying from the lane. So there's work here whether you'll pay me or no. Will you pay me?" "You do not know what I am," I said. It came out of me before I could stop it, low and ugly, and I meant it for a threat, and I meant it for a warning, and God help me, I think I half meant it for a question, though I did not know that yet. She got to her feet out of the straw. She was so much smaller than I, and she came near, and she looked up into the ruined side of my face, where the scar dragged my mouth crooked and clouded the eye. She looked at it full and plain in the lantern light, and did not drop her gaze, and she said, "I know you're a man who dragged his horse out of a fire and got burnt for the doing of it. I can read the burn, and I know that a burnt man growls to keep folk off because it hurts him to be looked at. My father was a farrier and got kicked full in the face by a shire colt when I was small, and he growled the rest of his days, and he was the gentlest soul I ever knew under all his growling." She stooped for her lantern. "Now will you pay me, sir? I've walked a long road and I'm bone tired, and there's a hound wanting me before I'll get any sleep. I did not shoot my horse that night. I did not do a great many things I had long meant to do. In the 2 years I had meant to do them. Once Meg Alder walked in at my gate. Her name was Meg Alder. I learned it from her that same night, and I have not been a day without it since. She would not go to her rest before she had seen the hound. So I took up her lantern, though I could not have told you then why I did not simply send her across the park alone, and I went before her out into the black, overgrown wilderness that had been my father's park, and the whole slow undoing of my grief began there, on that walk in the dark, though I did not feel it begin. The hound was called Walsey. He had been my brother Edmund's, a great rough deer-hound the color of cold iron, and after Edmund died in the fire the dog had gone half-wild with grief, the way I had gone half-wild with it. He had taken to the moor and lived rough up there for the better part of a year, coming down only in the hard weather, and some weeks past he had come home torn along the flank by a badger or a trap. I never learned which, and the wound had closed foul over the poison and swelled hot and hard, and now he lay in the straw of the far kennel and let no living soul near him. He had bitten young Ackroyd through the hand when the boy tried, and so the boy had left off trying, as all of them left off everything at Blackmere, and Walsey had lain there 3 days dying alone. And I who had loved that dog because my brother loved him, I who could have gone to him, I had not been able to make myself cross the threshold of that kennel. Because to lose Walsey was to lose the last living creature that had loved Edmund, and I was a coward about my grief in the particular way that a man can only ever be a coward about the one thing he loves the most. Meg went into him alone. I stood in the kennel door with the lantern, and I said, "He'll have your hand off. He took the stable boys," and she said, "Then hold the light steady, sir, and don't crowd the doorway." And she went down on her knees in the filthy straw and made that low wordless sound again, and she waited, and after a long slow while the dying dog dragged himself the last foot across the straw and laid his great gray head against her knee and let her touch the wound that was killing him. I watched her lance it and drain it and clean it by lantern light, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, talking to the dog the whole while in that low, even voice, not sweet, not coaxing, only steady, the way you'd speak to a frightened child you hadn't the time to lie to. And I stood in the doorway, and I found that my face was wet, and I was glad of the dark on the ruined side of it, because I had not wept in 2 years, and I would not be seen doing it now, least of all by her. "He'll do, I think," she said at last, sitting back on her heels, "if the fever breaks by morning. Whose is he?" "My brother's," I said. And then, because it was dark, and because she had her broad back to me, and because something in the sheer plainness of her had eased loose a nail in a door I had kept shut with all my strength, he died. In the fire. Edmund. He ran back in for, and I could not say it. In 2 years I had never once said it aloud. Meg did not turn round. She kept her 2 hands on the dog, and after a moment she said, quite gently, "You needn't tell me, sir. I only asked whose the dog was." But I found that I wanted to tell her. That is the strangest single thing I know how to set down about that first night, that a man who had spoken to no one for 2 years, and had wanted to speak to no one, stood in a kennel doorway and wanted, with a want that ached in his chest like the old burn, to be known by a muddy stranger kneeling in his straw. "He ran back in for the horses," I said. "The stable range had caught from the east range, the wind was carrying it. I'd got Sparabo clear and I was going back for the others, and Edmund was always faster than me, always. He was the younger and the quicker and the better loved. He went in past me before I could get a hand to him, and the roof came down. My voice was doing a thing I could not govern. I got the beam up off him. I got him out into the yard. It was my hand caught the fire, lifting the beam. But he'd breathed the smoke, and he lasted 2 days after, and then I stopped. He was 27. He was to be married in the spring. The kennel was very quiet. The dog breathed, slow and rattling. Somewhere out on the black moor a curlew called its long falling note. "And you've told yourself," Meg said, still not turning, still with her steady hands upon the dog, "every night from that one to this, that it should rightly have been you went in. Because you were the elder and the slower and the less loved, and the world would grieve for him and never miss you." I did not answer. I could not. She said softly. "I thought as much. It's writ all over you, sir, plainer than the burn is." And then she rose and gathered her things and said in her ordinary daytime voice, as though she had not just reached her blunt hand into my chest and named the very thing that lived there, "I'll want a bed near the kennels, and hot water in the morning, and someone to show me the still room if there's aught left growing in it. And I'll thank you not to shoot anything more tonight." She waited, and I could not speak, and she said, more gently than anything had been said to me in 2 years, "Go to your bed, sir. The dog and the horse are mine now. You've carried them long enough." I went to my bed. I lay in the cold ruin of my house and listened to the wind come off the moor, and for the first time since the night of the fire, I did not lie awake going back into the burning range after Edmund. I lay awake instead thinking of a plain, square-shouldered girl kneeling in bloodied straw, unafraid, saying, "They're mine now. You've carried them long enough." Both animals lived. That is the thing I want to set down before I tell you the rest, because the rest of this is about me, and I would rather tell you first about the horse and the dog, who deserved the saving far more than I did, and who were saved. But it was a near thing, and it was not quick, and it is in the doing of it that I first came to know her. The fever took Walsey that first night, as she had feared it might, and she sat up with him. I know she sat up with him because I could not sleep either, and toward the dead middle of the night I went down. I told myself I went to see whether the dog was dead yet, and I found her in the kennel with a horn-shielded candle, wringing cloths in a pail of cold well water and laying them along the great heaving gray flank, and singing to him. Not a hymn and not a ballad, some tuneless up-and-down thing with no proper words, the sort of sound a woman makes to a sick creature to let it know it is not alone in the dark. She did not stop when she saw me. She only shifted along the straw to make a place and said, "Wring those out cold and pass them to me as I want them, if you'll not sleep either." And so it was that the Duke of Blackmere spent the small hours of a November night sitting in his own kennel, wringing cloths for a kennel maid, keeping the fever off his dead brother's dog. We did not speak much. There was not much to say, and she was not a woman who filled a silence for the sake of filling it, which I have come to think is the rarest grace a person can have. But toward dawn, when the fever finally broke and the great flank ceased its heaving, and the dog fell into a true sleep at last, she sat back against the kennel wall with her hands loose in her lap, spent, and she looked at Walsey a long moment, and she said low, "He grieved himself half to death for your brother." "A 12-month on the moor," you said. "That's a deal of grieving for a dog." She was not looking at me. "It's a deal of grieving for a man and all." I said nothing. "I'll say no more on it," she said, which was I would learn exactly what she always said directly before saying the whole of it. "Only a creature that's grieved itself near to death, you don't cure it by leaving it alone in the dark. That's what near killed him. He wanted bringing in. He wanted someone to sit up the fever with." She got to her feet, stiff from the cold floor, and picked up her pail. "Get some sleep, sir. He'll want feeding when he wakes, and you'll want to be the one does it. He's your brother's, and it'll do the both of you good." She was speaking of the dog. I knew even then that she was not only speaking of the dog. Sparabo took the longer road. She kept him the 6 weeks in his stall as she had said she would, and she slept the first 10 nights of it on a pallet of straw outside his door, because the fever came and went in him twice before it gave up its hold, and each time she was there to break it. She stitched and unstitched and restitched that leg. She packed the wound with black stinking poultices she made in my dead mother's still-room, which she had swept out, and set to rights on her second morning without asking my leave, and without a word of apology for the presuming. When I found her at it, my mother's still-room, that had stood shut and dead since before the fire, the little bunches of herbs my mother had hung there gone to gray dust, I felt a flare of the old savage temper come up in me, that she should walk so plainly into a dead woman's room and make it live again. And Meg looked up from the mortar and read the temper on my face as easily as she read everything, and she did not quail from it. "Your mother grew good physic here," she said. "Comfrey and yarrow and marshmallow root, all gone to seed but come up again wild in the beds outside, which is how I knew. A still room's not meant to be a shrine, sir. It's meant to heal things. That's what it's for. Your mother would sooner it healed her son's horse than sat dead in her memory." And she went back to her grinding. And the temper went out of me like water out of a cracked jug, because she was right, and because there was no arguing with a woman who spoke of your dead mother as though she had known her and approved of her, and meant no harm by it, and was entirely correct. I began to bring her the herbs. That is a small thing to tell, but I have come to believe that the whole of a life is made of small things such as that. She would say at the accounts of a morning, for she had begun to keep the still-room stocked as though she meant to stay, which she had not been told she might, "I'm short of comfrey. There's a good stand of it down by the beck below the burnt range if you'd not mind the walk." And I would go and cut it and bring it to her, I who had not willingly walked out among the daylight in 2 years, and she would take it from my ruined hand without any ceremony and say, "That's the thing." "Thank you, sir," and go on with her grinding. And I would stand in the doorway of my mother's still room, watching a kennel maid make my mother's medicines, and feel something knit slowly back together in me that I had thought was burnt past mending. I have to tell you now about the collar, and the hat, and the 2 years of dark, because you cannot understand what she did to me without first understanding what I had made of myself. After the fire, when I came home from the surgeons in the city with my face and my hand and my leg all ruined, I found that I could not bear to be looked at. It was not the pain, though there was pain enough. It was the faces. My own tenants, men whose fathers had served my father, whose grandfathers had served my grandfather, would go still and careful when I came among them, and their children would stare and be snatched away, and the maids would drop what they carried, and in every startled eye I would see myself. A thing gone wrong, a wrong thing walking upright where it ought not, and I could not bear it. So I set about the business of not being looked at. I put my household off, one by one, as fast as they grew too frightened to be of any use, and I did not replace them. And at last I let the great rooms be shut up and shrouded, and the park go to wilderness, and the burnt east range stand black and open to the rain. A ruin I would not have pulled down, because it was the place where Edmund died, and I could not let go even of the thing that had killed him. I took to the dark shut rooms and the night hours. I had my food left at doors. I answered no letters. They came at first, and then, when none were answered, they stopped coming, which was its own kind of grief that I had wished upon myself. And when I could not wholly avoid a groom or a tradesman, I wore my collar to my jaw and my hat to my brow, and I growled, because a growl kept a man from looking, and being not looked at was the only mercy I any longer knew the way to. 2 years of that. 2 years of arranging the whole machinery of my days, so that no human eye should ever rest full upon my face. And then a girl walked in at my gate and looked at me, full and plain and near, by lantern light, and did not flinch. And I did not know what on earth to do with it, because the entire engine of my grief had been built and oiled and set running for the single purpose of ensuring that no one ever would. She looked at me every day after that. That is the whole of the miracle, and it was no miracle at all. It was only a plain girl being plain, morning after morning, until the plainness wore a channel through 2 years of stone. She would come to me at the accounts, for I had begun, God alone knows why, to keep the estate accounts again, simply to have a reason to be in a room she would come into. And she would stand at my right hand, the ruined side, the side I turned from every living soul, and she would lean over the ledger and set her blunt brown finger on a figure and say, "That's wrong, sir. The winter oats are counted twice, once under the home farm and again under Nethercroft." And she would be near enough that I could not have hidden the scar from her had I tried, and she did not once in all those weeks look away from it, and she did not once stare at it either. She let it be simply a part of the man she was talking to, the way the limp was, the way the cracked voice was. She made my ruin ordinary. And there is no gift on this earth greater, I have had long years to think on it, than to be made ordinary by someone, when you have spent 2 years believing yourself a horror. I began to live in the daylight. I did not decide upon it. It came the way the thaw comes, without a man's leave and against his settled expectation. I found that I was up at first light for the yard, and in the estate room by mid-morning, and out walking the wild park of an afternoon, because she walked the park of an afternoon with the mending dog at her heel. And I was, though I would not then have owned it for the world, arranging the whole shape of my day around the chance of being looked at by the one person on earth whose looking did not wound me. And through the whole of it the autumn came on gold, and then bronze, and then bare, and the first hard frost came and silvered the wilderness of the park, and Walsey grew sound and shadowed her everywhere she went, and Sparabo grew sound in his stall and whickered at the sound of her step, and I grew something too, out on that cold moor, though it was a long while before I would let myself call the thing by its right name. I marked the first day I heard her laugh, the way you mark the first morning the sun comes back over the shoulder of the fell in the new year. It was a hard, bright morning in the middle of November, with a thick frost from the night still lying blue in the shadows of the wall, and I came out to the lower paddock to find her attempting to worm a young hound that had strong opinions on the matter of being wormed, and the hound had thoroughly bested her, and had her sat flat in the frozen mud with her cap gone, and her dark hair all down about her shoulders, and her broad face a very picture of outrage. And the young hound stood off 3 feet, wagging its whole hindquarters at her, delighted beyond measure with itself. And she looked at it, sat there in the frozen mud, and she began to laugh. A great, round, unladylike, unstoppable peal of it, rolling out across the white paddock. Walsey barked and the young hound barked, and she laughed the harder for it, helpless, and I stood at the paddock rail and felt my own ruined face do a thing it had not done in 2 years. I felt it smile. It hurt. The scar pulls when I smile. It is one of the reasons I had left off smiling. But I smiled at the paddock rail in the frost, watching Meg Alder laugh in the mud, and she looked up and caught me at it, caught the smile on the ruined side of my face, where no living soul had seen a smile since the night of the fire, and she did not laugh at it, and she did not look away from it, and she did not go careful and kind. She only looked at me smiling as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world for a man to do, and she said, "There, sir, I knew there was a smile in you somewhere under all that thatch. Now come and help me catch this devil before he wants worming twice over." And I climbed the paddock rail, who dragged my leg and hid my hand and had not been down among the animals in the broad daylight since the fire, and I went down into the frozen mud on my ruined side, and I caught the hound, and I laughed. It came out of me rusty and strange, my laugh, long unpracticed, but it came out. And she heard it, and something crossed her plain, broad face that I did not understand then and understand very well now, and she said, more to the hound than to me, "That's better. That's a deal better than a growl." I could set down 100 such mornings, and I will not, because you will begin to think that I was happy, and I want you to understand that I was not yet happy, because a thing had begun to happen inside me that frightened me worse than ever the fire had. I had begun to love her. I do not mean that I had grown fond of her, though I had. I do not mean that I valued her, though I did, past any wage I paid or could have paid. I mean that I, the Beast of Blackmere, a ruined scar of a man a dozen years her elder, had fallen into love with a plain, fearless Kennel Maid the way a man falls through rotten ice, all at once, and all the way, and with no bottom anywhere beneath him. And the day I knew it past denying, the day I could no longer pretend that it was only that I liked to have her keep my accounts and cut my herbs, the whole slow warmth of that autumn turned in an instant to torment in me. Because a man may learn to bear being looked at, but to be loved, to want to be loved by the one soul on earth who looked at him kindly, and to know with the flat certainty of the mirror I had covered over and the 2 years of eyes I had read, that no woman living could ever look upon this ruin of a face and love it, that was a torment against which I had built no dark room deep enough to hide. So I did the thing that wounded men do. I set myself to drive her away before she could see fully what I had become, and before I could learn for certain what I already believed, and I very nearly lost her by it. It is the part of my own history of which I am most ashamed, and I will tell it plain, because she would want it told plain. It began, as such things do, with the county. We had kept so long to ourselves, she and I and the animals, that I had half forgotten there remained a county to keep from. But there did, and it had not forgotten me. Word had got about at Harden Market, carried, I do not doubt, by young Ackroyd, who had left my service but not left off talking of it, that the Beast of Blackmere had taken on a woman up at the Hall, and a story of that shape does not lie quiet in a country neighborhood. The first I knew of the county's renewed attention was a Sunday. Meg had asked, plainly and without any expectation of refusal, whether she might walk down to Harden of a Sunday to the church there, it being 3 miles by the fell path, and I had said she might, and thought no more of it, until she came home in the early dark of that first Sunday with a stillness on her that I had not seen in her before. She said nothing of it. She never complained of anything. it was not in her. But I asked her at the accounts on the Monday why she had come home so quiet, and she was silent a moment, and then she said in her plain way, "The women moved along the pew when I sat, all of them, left me a clear yard of empty oak either side and would not meet my eye." She shrugged her square shoulders. "It's naught. I'm used to being the plain one at the back of a church. I only didn't look for it here." And she went on with the figures. But it was not naught, and we both knew it was not naught, and I felt the old savage temper come up in me, not at her, for once, but on her behalf, which was a new and dangerous thing, because I understood at once what the empty yard of pew meant. It did not mean they thought her plain. It meant they had decided what a woman must be, who went to live alone up at the hall with the beast. I said nothing then, but it sat in me and festered, the way a foul wound festers, all through the dark turning of that year toward Christmas. The wound came to a head on a gray afternoon a few days before the shortest day, when the master of the hunt rode up to Blackmere. His name I will not trouble to set down. He was a florid, loud, heavy man who had coveted my late father's fox-coverts for 20 years, and had never forgiven me the offense of being alive to keep them from him. He came up on the pretext of some disputed boundary along the top of the beck, and on the true errand of a look at the beast and his woman, that he might carry the tale back to every dinner table in the riding fresh from the source. And he found Meg alone in the yard, holding the great gray stallion, who was sound enough now to be led out for his exercise. He did not know her for a servant. So plainly did she stand, so easily and surely did she hold that great horse, that he took her for something else, and being unable to place her, and being the sort of man he was insolent to her. I heard the shape of it from the stable dark, though not all the words, a heavy, jocular, filthy sort of insolence, the kind such men believe a compliment. And then his eye found me, where I had drawn back into the stable door out of 2 years' hard habit, and I heard him say to his companion, in that carrying voice such men use precisely because they wish to be overheard, "Good God, so it's true, then. The beast keeps a woman up here after all." And he laughed an ugly, knowing, wet laugh, and did not finish the thought, and did not need to finish it, and turned his horse and rode off down the drive very well pleased with his afternoon sport. I came out of the stable dark shaking, not with the shame of being seen. I had long since worn that shame smooth, with the shame of her being seen, with the certainty of that florid fool riding home to every table in the riding to say that the Beast of Blackmere kept a woman, and to make of Meg's steady, unbought goodness a filthy jest passed round over the port, and to soil her good name in 100 country parlors for no crime on earth but that she had been kind to a monster. And in the black flood of that shame, I resolved upon the cruel and cowardly thing. She must go. She must be got away from Blackmere, and away from me, and away from the filth the county would heap upon her for my sake, and it must be done at once, before her name was ruined past mending. And the surest way to send her, the only way, for I knew her too well by now to think she would go for her own sake, the surest way was to make her believe that I wished her gone. So I was a beast to her. I made myself one, deliberately, coldly. It was the easiest part I have ever played in my life, and the one I most despise myself for having played. I told her that same evening, cold and clipped in the estate room with the ledger open before me as a shield, that her work at Blackmere was done. The horse was sound, the dog was sound, the kennels were in good order and the still room stocked, and I had no further use for a maid and would not keep one idle on charity. I told her there were wages owing, and that a cart could be got up from Harden in the morning to carry her back down, and I did not look at her while I said it. I looked at the ledger, and I put back into my voice the growl I had used for 2 years to keep the whole world off, and I turned it now upon the one person in all the world who had never once deserved it. There was a long silence in the room. The fire settled, and then Meg said in her plain voice, not hurt, not yet, only careful, the way she was careful with a frightened animal she meant to save, "Who was the loud man in the yard this afternoon, sir?" "That is no concern of yours." He said a thing about me, didn't he? I couldn't catch the words of it, but I saw your face when he rode off, and I've never in 3 months seen your face wear that look, not even the first night over the horse. What did he say about me? Nothing, be ready at first light. She came round the table then. She came round to my right hand, to the ruined side, the way she always came, and she stood close, and I would not lift my eyes to her, and she said very quietly, "He said something filthy, about a woman living alone up here with you, and you've gone and decided to send me off before it can touch me any worse. That's the whole of it, isn't it?" She was not asking. She had that trick of never asking. "You're throwing me out to save my name." "Get to your packing," I said, and my voice cracked clean across on it, and she heard the crack, she heard everything. She always heard everything. "Look at me," she said. I would not. Alaric. She had never once used my given name. I had not known that she knew it. It went through me like the fire had gone through my hand, a clean, bright, unbearable pain that changes a man in the instant of it. "Look at me," she said again. And I looked at her, because in 3 months I had never once been able to refuse her anything at all, and my ruined face was doing the wet shamming thing it did, and I could not hide it from her, and she looked at it full and plain, and near in the candlelight the whole scarred streaming ruin of it, and she did not flinch, and she said, "You great foolish man, you've told yourself you're sending me down the fell to spare me the county's dirt, but that's not the reason you can't look at me across a table any longer, and you know in your heart it isn't. You've not been able to look at me proper for a fortnight, and it's not to do with any loud fool in the yard, for that only happened today. Shall I say the reason, since you won't? You've gone and let yourself care for me, and it's frightened you half out of your wits. Because you've told yourself every night for 2 years that no living woman could ever look on that face and hear her own plain voice caught, just the once, the only time in all our years together that I ever heard it falter and love it. And rather than stay and risk finding out you're wrong, you'd pack me off down the fell in a cart at first light and go back to your dark and your growl, because the dark never once told you no." She lifted her blunt brown hand, slowly, the very way she had put it out toward Sparabo on that first night, giving me all the time in the world to shy from it. "Well, you're wrong, sir," she said, "and I'll not be sent down the fell to spare you the trouble of finding it out." And she laid her hand against the ruined side of my face, the scarred side, the side no living hand had touched in 2 years, the side I turned from every eye on earth, the side I had built a whole life of dark rooms and high collars and midnight hours to keep from ever being seen. She laid her warm, rough, work-hardened Kennel Maid's hand full against the burn of it gently, and she held it there, and she looked at me, and she did not flinch, and she said, "There now. It's only a face that got itself burnt saving a horse and trying to save a brother, and it's the dearest face I know in all the world. I will not tell you that I was cured of my grief that night. A man is not cured of 2 years of dark in a single evening, and I was not. But I will tell you that I turned my face into her hand, I, who had kept my face from every hand for 2 years. I turned the whole ruin of it into her open palm, and I wept at long last, all the way down and all the way through, for Edmund, and for the fire, and for the 2 lost years, and for the sheer unbearable mercy of being loved in the one single place on earth I had believed unlovable. And she held me, this small, plain, fearless girl, standing at my ruined side in the candlelight with her hand against my burnt face, and she did not send for any cart, and I did not let her go down to Hardin, and neither of us ever again spoke of my sending her away, except in later years to be ashamed of it together, which is, I have found, the only good and healing way to speak of an old cruelty. But being loved and being cured are 2 different roads, and I want to be honest with you about the second, because I was honest with her about it in the end, and it is the honesty that saved us. For a fortnight after that night I was happier than I had been since before the fire, and then, quite without warning, the old dark came up over me again like water over a man's head, and I could not for the life of me have told you why. Nothing had gone wrong. She had not changed toward me. And yet I woke one gray morning with the whole weight of it back upon my chest. The certainty that I was a ruin, that I had no business drawing this good woman down into the dark with me, that Edmund had been the one worth saving, and it was a kind of theft that I lived on to be loved when he lay in the ground, and I could not rise, and I could not speak, and I turned my face to the wall. She found me so, and she did not coax, and she did not scold, and she did not tell me to count my blessings, which is the cruelest thing a well-meaning soul can say to a man in the dark. She sat down on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap, and she said, "The dark's come back on you." Not a question. It does that. It came back on my father over and again, for years after the colt, on days there was no reason for it. It's not a thing that mends all at once and stays mended, the burnt kind of grief. It comes and it goes, like the fever came and went in the horse. "Then I am no use to you," I said to the wall. "You have taken on a ruin, you should have gone down the fell." "I've taken on a man who has bad days and good ones," she said. "Same as every soul that ever lived, only yours come deeper and darker than most, for you've cause. And on the bad days I'll sit the fever with you, same as I sat it with the dog and the horse. That's all. That's the whole of what love is when you scrape the poetry off it, sir. It's sitting up the fever with a creature till the fever breaks, over and over, for as long as it takes. I'm not afeard of a fever. I've never yet been afeard of a fever." She put her hand on my shoulder over the blankets, and she left it there, and she did not require me to speak, and after a long while, an hour more, the weight lifted a little, the way it does, and I turned back from the wall, and she was still there, and she had known that she would still be there, and so, for the first time, had I. That was the true turning, not the hand on my face in the candlelight. That was the beginning. The true turning was the gray morning she sat the dark out with me, and did not flinch from that either, and taught me that a man may be loved not only in his one brave hour of being seen, but in all his dull, gray, unheroic hours of being merely born with. I have never since been able to hear a man say love without thinking of a plain girl, saying it's sitting up the fever till the fever breaks, over and over, for as long as it takes. We did not marry in haste. I would not have it done in a corner in shame, as the county plainly expected, and I would not have her name a whispered jest for one day longer than it took to make her instead my honored wife before God and the whole parish in the broad light of day. So we did it slowly, and we did it properly, and we did it in the plain open sight of everyone I had spent 2 years hiding from. I began by putting my household back together, a soul at a time. I sent word down to Hardin for Tom Sowerby, the old groom who had meant to leave me on the night of the horse, and I asked him plainly, a duke to a groom, which I do not think had ever happened at Blackmere in 300 years, whether he would come back, there being a stable worth keeping again and a master worth working for, or trying to be. He came the next morning, and he looked me full in the ruined face, having heard it all in the market, and he touched his cap and said only, "It's good to see the gray sound again, your grace," and went to his work, and it was the first time a man had called me your grace without the word curdling in his mouth in 2 years, and I had to go into the tack passage and be alone a while. Then the maids came back, and a cook, and a boy for the boots, and a woman for the dairy, one by one over the winter, and Blackmere came alive around me by slow degrees, and I found that I could bear the eyes now, not because the scar was any less, but because I had been looked at by the one pair of eyes that mattered, and had lived, and so the rest had somehow lost their power to wound. And I had the burnt East Range pulled down. That was the hardest thing I did, harder than the household, harder than the church. For 2 years I had kept that black ruin standing open to the sky because Edmund had died in it, and to pull it down felt like burying him a second time. I told Meg so, and she heard me out, and then she said, "A grave's a good thing, sir. It's a place to lay a man down and know where he is, so you can visit him and then come home again to the living. But that black ruin's no grave. It's the moment of the fire, frozen and stood upright, and you've been living in the moment of the fire for 2 years in among the burnt beams, never able to lay him down and come home. Pull it down. Make it a garden. Then you'll have somewhere to lay him and somewhere to come home to, and they'll not be the same place. So I had it pulled down, and I planted a garden where it had stood, a physic garden in the end, for Meg's still room, comfrey and yarrow and marshmallow, and my mother's old roses brought back from where they had run wild along the beck. And I planted it myself, on my knees in the good earth on my ruined side, with Meg beside me. And I laid my brother down at last in the growing of it, and I came home. We were married in the spring, in the little gray church at Harden, on a morning of thin, bright sun, before the whole parish. I did not wear my collar to my jaw nor my hat to my brow. I stood at the altar with the scarred side of my face turned full to the light and to the assembled county, because I had a reason now to be looked at, and the reason was standing beside me in a plain gown that was the finest thing she owned, unafraid, as she had been unafraid on the first night in the yard. The women who had moved along the pew away from her came, in the end, and sat, and some of them even wept, which is the way of country women at a wedding, whatever they may have said over their own hearths the week before. And I did not hold it against them, because Meg did not hold it against them, and she had taught me by then that a person is more than the worst afternoon of their small-mindedness, the same as a man is more than the worst hour of his grief. The florid master of the hunt came again to Blackmere that first spring, meaning, I do not doubt, some fresh mischief, some renewed sport at the beast's expense. He found the Duke of Blackmere out in the new garden in his shirt-sleeves in the sun, with his ruined face bare, planting roses on his knees beside the plain Kennel Maid who was now, before God and the parish and the law of England, the Duchess of Blackmere, and who stood at his right hand as she had always stood, at the ruined side, and had never once looked away. And the loud man found, to his evident confusion, that he had nothing filthy left to say, for there is nothing filthy that can be said of a man and his lawful wife on their knees together in their own garden in the spring sun. And he made some stiff remark about the weather, and touched his hat to the Duchess, whom he could no longer fail to place, and rode off down the drive, and I never once troubled myself to learn where. They call me the Beast of Blackmere still, some of them, the ones who love a good story better than they love a neighbor. I find I do not mind it now. Let them. A beast is only a wounded creature that growls to keep the world off because it hurts too much to be looked at. And that is precisely what I was, and I have learned that there was never any curing of such a beast by argument, nor by pity, nor by the mere passage of time. There was only ever the one cure, and it is the plainest thing in all the world, and it is the very rarest. It is to be looked at full and near and long by someone who will not look away. She is out in the yard now as I set this down, gentling a colt that came in frightened this morning. I can hear her through the open window, that low wordless sound she makes, and the colt going quiet under it, the way the whole of Blackmere went quiet and sound under it, the horse, and the dog, and the house, and the man. Whilst he lies gray and old and easy at my feet, and stirs his tail when I speak the name. The garden where the fire was is full of my mother's roses and my brother's peace. Sparabo is out to grass, sound and idle and fat, and carries our eldest boy at a walk about the paddock. And every single morning of my life, my wife looks up at the ruined side of my face across the breakfast table as though it were the most ordinary face in all of England. And every morning I remember the night she walked in at my gate out of the dark, bone-tired and mudded to the knee, unafraid, and looked full at the beast, and saw the man in it and stayed. She never once looked away. That is the whole of it. That is the whole of my life, and I would not trade 1 hour of it, not even the burnt ones. She looked at the worst of me by lantern light on the first night, and she did not flinch, and she never from that night to this once looked away.